Congratulations, President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, on your historic inauguration. President Biden, you and I have had a warm personal friendship going back many decades.
I fondly remember those Jewish National Fund boxes that we would use to collect donations to plant trees for Israel.
The Jewish National Fund is a charity. If you make a donation to it, it's tax deductible. It operates as a charity in most Western countries, in most of Europe, in America, in Canada, and so on. But the Jewish National Fund's role here is to enforce the dispossession of the refugees and to enforce a war crime. What we're seeing here, of course, is a war crime. And to enforce it and then to conceal it. The other part of this, of course, is to conceal the war crime. And the trees and the forests are a large part of that function. So much of the money that was raised by the Jewish National Fund, tax-deductible money that was raised, charitable money, was used to plant these forests. That's where the money went. Now, the forests serve several functions. Why choose these trees? I mean, it's the choice of tree here that reveals quite a lot as well. These trees are chosen. They're mostly there are a few varieties of pine that are indigenous to this area, to this region. But most of these pines are imported. They're not from this area, and certainly they don't grow in these kinds of forested conditions. So Israel chooses this. Now, when they plant these forests of trees like this, the primary function was to conceal the war crime. That's why you choose these trees, because they're pine trees, they're fast growing and they're evergreen. So they quickly cover up the war crime and they give you round year cover. Now these forests aren't, this particular forest isn't looking the way it looked when I first came here 15 years ago. It's been much thinned out. And one has to ask, why has it been thinned out? And nobody's written about this, but I can guess why it has been. And this is related to the Carmel forest fire in 2010. Some of you may remember there was this huge raging forest fire up on the Carmel mountain next to Haifa. It was on the TV, and Israel was really frightened that Haifa was going to burn down, and it was saved by the Turks actually. The Turkish lent these big water carrying planes, had these underbellies that open and all the water drops out. Israel doesn't have this kind of equipment, and so these were used and put out the fire just before it sort of singed the edges of Haifa. Now, there are 3 destroyed villages up on the Carmel mountain, that's why there's a forest there, just like there was here. And Israel had planted a thick forest up there to conceal the remains of the destroyed villages. And because these trees are highly flammable, they're not really suited to these very dry conditions in the summer, somebody just needs to throw a cigarette out the window and the whole thing goes up. This is the problem. And Israel learnt a very painful lesson there, and I think it's been applying that lesson since. So forests like this have been really thinned out, because in a sense they've served their function. Israel isn't too worried about concealing the war crimes now. Most people have forgotten about that. They think it's history and an old story. But certainly in the 50s and 60s, this would have been a dense canopy. It would have all been very dark and murky in there. It would have been a very useful way of concealing what had happened.
You know, I used to say early on when I was a kid, when I was a young senator, I'd say, if I were a Jew, I'd be a Zionist. I am a Zionist. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist. And that's the sense, this sense of vulnerability, which worries me.
You are remarkable, by the way, that you stayed here and spoke to every single one of us.
Well, they were kind to come.
Well, you're wonderful. So listen, the only thing I'll say to you is, if you become President of the United States, I want to be able to call, and you'll give me 2 minutes then too.
Absolutely.
Fair enough?
You got it. It's
Senator
a deal,
Joseph
Mark.
Biden,
It's a deal.
thank you.
It's a deal.
I believe Israel should never be a partisan issue. And as long as I'm a United States Senator, I will do everything in my power to ensure broad and bipartisan support.
I want to thank you, Democrats and Republicans, for your common support for Israel, year after year, decade after decade. No matter on which side of the aisle you sit, you stand with Israel.